and welcome to another exciting episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. I'm your host, Michael, and I gotta say, watching that new intro for this season, I gotta give shout out to my cousin who made that for me because that is such a cool intro, and I find myself getting lost in it, going, "Oh, I, I need to talk about that topic." Yes. And so I put his website up there for anyone who's looking for intros or outros or ads. Now, with that being said, I am going to introduce our guest tonight. He is got so much information to share with us. I'm not even sure if we can get it all in tonight, but we'll do our best. So I am going to introduce you all to the one, the only, James Szubski.
Szubski.
Szubski. I was so focused on getting it right. But I was close.
You were.
So for those who may not be familiar with your area that you focus in, can you give our audience a little background on yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is James Szubski, and I own an outdoor adventure store in the Columbia River Gorge. And so that's the Columbia River forms the border between southern Washington State and northern Oregon State. And I'm about 60 miles, 60 miles east of Portland, Oregon. And so the area that we're in, the Columbia River Gorge, was the country's first national scenic area because it is jaw-droppingly beautiful. National scenic area is basically a national park where people can live and have businesses. And so the river itself is the only sea level passage through the Cascade Mountains. And so some folks may be familiar with like Mount St. Helens, which erupted in 1980, or Mount Adams, which has had a lot of UFO activity, Mount Hood, which is a Sasquatch hotspot. And so my wife and I inherited several businesses about 3 years ago. And about 2 years ago, we, in the outdoor store, we began a paranormal reporting program. So we had people spontaneously coming in and telling us about their encounters in the wilderness. And people were talking about encounters with Bigfoot-like creatures, UFOs, and other strange things like temporal anomalies and portals. And I was fascinated, really interesting stuff. And so we put up a big sign in the window, and that sign said, "File your paranormal reports here." And I really didn't know what we were going to do with it. But now, almost 2 years later, we've had over 250 reports.
That's amazing. And so just to be clear, when you say, paranormal reports, are people coming in and saying, "Hey, I've seen a portal," or "Hey, I've seen a UFO," or how is, all of this coming into awareness?
Sure. So, like I said, a lot of times, we're a small town. So in the gorge is about 80 miles long and probably extends maybe, the area that we consider the gorge is extending probably 30 miles north and 30 miles south of that. So it's a pretty large area. But there not more than 100,000 people live here. And there's a number of small towns, small communities. I think the biggest one maybe has 20,000 people in it. The town where my store is, Bingen, Washington, has 800 permanent residents. And we're right across a big old bridge from Hood River, Oregon. And it's so the gorge is just a truly amazing place. With the mountains there, we have waterfalls that are over 600 feet tall, and there are more than 90 named waterfalls on the Oregon side alone. There are over 600 caves in the area. There are mountains everywhere, and they form a rain shadow. So the western half of the gorge is basically a Pacific Northwest rainforest, and the eastern half is a high plains desert, with rock mesas and that type of stuff. There is whitewater rafting, paragliding, windsurfing, mountain climbing, rock climbing, spelunking. I mean, it really is an adventurous paradise. And so a lot of folks come here to vacation, recreate, do have truly legitimate adventures out here. And so it started with people just coming into the store, and it's just me and my the people who work for me, listening to their stories. And so pretty soon, once we put up that big sign, we created a form, that you could fill out so we could sort of get some consistency in how people report that information. And so a lot of times folks just want to tell us a story. And sometimes the reports aren't, incredibly detailed. It's just, quick, I had this encounter and it didn't last very long kind of thing. Some of them are very detailed and they're pages long. And then we get the written reports in the store. We get verbal reports. Recently, we put the reporting form up online on our website, so margiesoutdoorstore.com, and a lot of folks report that way. We do a lot of work in social media in the local community, and we'll often ask local community, we just had this kind of experience, has anyone had something like that? And so we get a lot of reports through Facebook. And I've become kind of well known in the area. And so now people will stop me in restaurants or in the grocery store or, at the post office and say, "Hey, James, I know that you take in these kind of reports. And let me tell you this story that I've had." I think the secret to our success is from the very beginning, I had some very firm instructions for my employees. I said, when someone comes in and has a strange encounter to relate, we're going to treat them with the utmost respect. And we're going to ask intelligent follow-up questions. We're not going to give them a side eye. We're going to be a safe place to tell your story. I know from personal experience that, we knew that some people would come in and, tell a tall tale and just have some fun. And we figured no harm, no foul. It's just, people having a good time. But if you have had a truly unusual experience, you can often go years and have no one to talk to about it. Your family won't believe you, or they'll laugh nervously or dismiss it. It's hard to talk to your friends or your coworkers. And so we have earned a reputation as being a place where you can tell your story and we'll listen to you and we'll treat you like an adult. We'll believe the witness, and we'll see where things go from there.
That's really cool and special, because I can tell you, living here in Texas, if you say, "Hey, I've seen a UFO," or "I've seen a ghost," half the time you'll get laughed at, like you're saying. And the other half, it's like they'll listen, but you're like, are they really listening, or are they just appeasing me?
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to laugh later. But that's really cool that you create that safe space. And I'm kind of curious because, like, Shannon's bringing up a good point in the chat group. She says, "I feel strongly that a mineral rare is in the water." Have you found anything like that? Have you checked what's in the water that helps make the area so special?
Well, the gorge has a truly astonishing geologic history, and she may be onto something there. So I should give your listeners a little bit of a sort of paint a picture of what the gorge is like, and how it was formed. So the river has been flowing here, by some estimates, over 40 million years. And so that is an incredibly strong current of energy to be running through one area for that long. If you just think about it, that energy moving through here, it's both the water and the wind that go down this channel. And in some places, the gorge is, like I said, the only sea level passage through the Cascade Mountains. And so you can go from sea level, or just a little bit above sea level, to 3,000 feet in less than half a mile. And they were formed in a really unusual way. In fact, there's no place else in the world quite like it. About 17 million years ago, a gigantic fissure opened in the earth at the Washington-Idaho border. And they estimate that it was 97 miles long, and enormous volumes of lava just started spewing out of it. Very uncharacteristic for the Pacific Northwest. Normally, we have, a different kind of volcano, not like the Hawaii volcanoes. Ours just sort of the mountain blows up and collapses. But this was that ropey, thin, soupy lava. And it flowed through the ancient Columbia River Valley, which was a gentle valley at the time, 300 miles all the way to the ocean. And the amount of lava that came out of this thing is absolutely mind boggling. In some places in eastern Washington, this lava is 3 miles thick. They estimate that if you took all the lava that came out during this eruptive period, and this eruptive period lasted several million years, it would cover the entire lower 48 states of the United States in 60 feet of lava, the whole thing buried. Now, this lava didn't erupt all at one time. There were hundreds of lava flows. And so the lava would come out of the fissure, it would flow across Washington and Oregon, and then it would cool and harden. And as it did, the magnetic material in the lava would orient towards the Earth's magnetic north. And so, and then it would cool and get locked in place. Well, so the next time the lava flowed, it might be 10,000, 100,000 years later, the North Pole would have wandered. So I'm sure many of your listeners are aware that our magnetic North Pole is moving. In the last 100 years, it's moved over 700 miles. So you can imagine that over 10,000 years or even 100,000 years, that North Pole can move considerably. Well, when that next lava flow comes, its magnetic material orients to the new magnetic north, and when it cools, it gets locked in place. And so in the gorge, you can see in some places 20, 30, maybe even 40 of these different layers. And each one of them has a unique magnetic signature. And so what that means is that the gorge has got this extremely complicated electromagnetic environment. And when you look at the navigation maps put out by the government, the NOAA maps that are used by, the ship traffic that moves through here and the aircraft, there are bright pink letters on every one of those maps that says, warning, your compass readings will be off in the Columbia River Gorge. And so when you talk about there being something in the water, it's something in the rocks that is really, I think, impacting some of the experiences people are having here. And, we can get into that in more detail a little later on, but I should maybe talk about some of the experiences that we're hearing about. So Washington State has the highest per capita Sasquatch sightings, and there are two counties in the gorge. One is Skamania County, where my home is, and the other is Klickitat County, where my store is. And Skamania County has by far the most Sasquatch sightings in Washington State. Washington State's also known as having the highest number of UFO sightings per capita. And so in Klickitat County, especially around Mount Adams, we way over index on those as well. So we get reports of those kind quite frequently. We also get reports of other strange cryptids. There's a creature here that hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about. We call it the Klickitat, this Black Panther-like creature. We've had 80 reports of that alone. We get reports of small humanoids. We get reports of temporal displacement. People report seeing portals. There's lots of strange government activity out here. Very rich ghost story traditions that go out here, especially out in the Dalles, which is kind of in the eastern side of the gorge on the Oregon side of the river. This was the end of the Oregon Trail. And it was, where all the pioneers were coming to the west, eventually stopped there. They survived the Oregon Trail. And then that's not a ghost town. It is a ghost metropolis. I mean, the number of stories that we have out there is just off the charts. And so what's interesting to me, here we are in the store and we're getting literally hundreds of reports coming in. And so this is the experience that people are having. And, I've had a few unusual experiences myself, but the one thing I can say with absolute clarity is that people have more experiences in the gorge than normal. It is a place that over indexes in people feeling like or reporting these kinds of experiences. And so we, have to ask ourselves, why is that the case? And I think it is directly related to this electromagnetic environment. I talked about how the water has been flowing here for some estimates 45 million years. And you can talk about, the energy that's flowing through the gorge. And in one sense, that might be like a woo-woo kind of etheric energies that you really can't define. On the other hand, there are 14 hydroelectric dams on the Columbia River, and they provide 44% of all the hydroelectric power in the United States. That nearly half of the hydroelectric power in the whole country comes from this river. And what that means is that the energy of the river is literally being transformed into an energy source that we recognize and understand and know how to work with. And that energy, once it's captured by these hydroelectric dams, is then transported through the gorge on these, enormous transmission lines. And so that again is adding to this unique electromagnetic environment. But one of the most famous stories about how the gorge is formed is a story that's 15,000 years old. And so many of your listeners may be familiar with Graham Hancock or Randall Carlson talking about the Younger Dryas floods. Well, that happened right in my backyard. And so basically, there was, during the last ice age, this enormous lake formed in Missoula, Montana. So the theory goes. And it was held back by a gigantic glacial ice dam. Well, that dam catastrophically failed in a single day. And a giant flood washed across eastern Washington. This flood was so enormous. I mean, it was truly biblical. It is the largest flood that we know about that ever happened on Earth. And if you imagine, it was the size of all of the rivers on Earth combined times 10. As it flowed across eastern Washington, at some places it was over 300, 400 feet deep, and it's scouring the landscape, creating these huge ripples in the landscape. Well, as it got backed up at the Columbia River Gorge, there's a place called Wallula Gap, and it sort of created a backfill, and then it shot down. And in some places, the water flowing through the gorge is over 1,000 feet deep. They estimate that right by my store, it was 800 feet deep. And as it ran through the gorge, it tore boulders and rocks off the walls, removed all of the soil, all topsoil, trees. Every living thing was just completely destroyed and washed out to sea, 100 miles away. And what that did is it exposed all of those rock layers. And so as you drive through the gorge, you see these magnificent cliffs, and they have these like a layer cake, just these different layers of all those different lava. Basically, normally you only walk on the top layer and it's got its own magnetic signature. Well, as you drive through the gorge or hike through the gorge or sail through the gorge, all of those layers are exposed, each with a different magnetic signature. And it's just like a live wire because it's right there, and that water scoured everything away. So it makes the gorge incredibly beautiful, but it also creates this really amazing electromagnetic environment. And then the final thing that makes it crazy out here is about 2 million years ago, the Cascade Mountains started rising up. Literally, the river is older than the mountains. And they started taking those layers and bending them, as it came up, and it would bend those layers and create all these angled, contorted forms in the rock. And in many of those places, people report glowing orbs. And in fact, I have taken pictures of them myself, and my wife and I have seen them as we drive down the gorge. And we have dozens and dozens of reports of people seeing glowing orbs, especially around these areas of great tectonic stress. So I know that maybe your listener had a different idea about something in the water, but it definitely has to do with the way the minerals were formed here in the gorge, the way the rock layers were laid down, and how they were exposed. And the reason why I believe this is part of why people are having these experiences is that there have been a number of studies where basically the human mind in the temporal lobes and in the hippocampus has been recorded to have 5 million magnetite crystals per gram of brain matter in these areas. These brain structures are active during when people are seeing visions and things like that, right? And so these magnetite crystals in the human mind are actually Dr. Michael Persinger was the man who studied it. He was up at Laurentine University in Ontario, Canada, back in the 80s. He would manipulate magnetic fields around a person's brain and induce a whole series of perceptual effects. And so we have absolute scientific proof, peer-reviewed, well documented, really good science that's showing that magnetic fields can influence human brain activity. And some of the things that he was able to induce were really astonishing. There's this notion of a sensed presence that people would feel under certain conditions. He was able to do things like turn fear on and off like a switch, and a number of other strange phenomena. In fact, 3 of his subjects reported actually meeting God while under the influence of these magnetic fields. And so what I think is happening here, why we have so many people filing reports and being willing to talk about these strange experiences, and honestly, I believe we're only get a fraction of the number of folks that are actually experiencing things, is that due to a combination of our unique geology with certain, solar magnetic influences, the solar wind is always impacting our magnetosphere, and then things within a person individually, depending on, maybe even what you ate that day, can all come together to create these really unique perceptions. And so, for example, there's a mountain here called Underwood Mountain. And in March of this year, someone sent me a photograph, what we believe is a probable UFO. And it looks like one of those classic Tic Tacs that you see in the Navy fighter pilot gun cams. So that Tic Tac shape is sitting right above Underwood Mountain. Underwood Mountain is one of those mountains that sort of bent those layers, right? And photographic proof. It was taken from 12 miles away. We did some photo enhancements on it. No wings, no rotors, clearly not a lenticular cloud. So we can say probable UFO. Now, right below that, so that's probably 3,000 feet where the top of Underwood Mountain is. At the river level of Underwood Mountain is where I took the photograph of the glowing orb. And it's this blue glowing orb, clearly not a lens flare, clearly not some kind of reflection of headlights. And it's captured on film. But my wife and I have seen these things with our naked eye in that same area. And then a gentleman living on Underwood Mountain, there are a number of vineyards and farms up there. He reported seeing glowing orbs in the sky above his property. They descended to the ground level. In his report, they turned into a pair of eyes and then began approaching him. And like a switch was thrown, he was overcome with just an intense terror and fear. And he ran into his house and got a shotgun. And by the time he came out, the phenomenon had ended. And so when I look at that collection, just those 3 stories in Underwood Mountain alone, we know that we're in an area of high tectonic stress where these magnetic layers are bent in a really unusual way. We're getting photographic evidence of phenomenon. So we know it's not confined to someone's mind. It's not a personal hallucination. I guess personal hallucinations don't show up on photographs. And we have actual first-person reports of these things as well. And they're having the same effect that Dr. Persinger was able to induce with his magnetic field manipulation around his subjects. And so, again, that's just a snippet of some of the things that are going on out here. And what's really fun is that in the store, people are coming in and we're able to start seeing patterns of the types of phenomenon that people are experiencing and where they're occurring. And I have to tell you, it is a complete joy. I mean, it's sort of like a new Scooby-Doo mystery walks in our door, a couple times a week, and we get to check it out and, talk to these people and try to make sense of what's going on out here.
That's really cool. And we were talking backstage, and you shared too something that is unique to the gorge area. And as we're talking about it, and I'm hearing all the electromagnetics and everything, I can't help but think, did that tie into why the government in World War II used that area?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Upriver from the gorge, not actually in the gorge, but just upriver from the gorge, is the Hanford nuclear site. And so during World War II, the Allies were terrified that the Nazis would uncover the secrets of the atom before they did. Everyone is aware that they were worried about them creating the bomb. And so you had the Los Alamos team, and that's where the physicists and engineers were designing the bomb. But Hanford is a 600 square mile area, and the government came in and evicted everyone who lived there, including the Native Americans. It was a traditional fishing and hunting ground. And it's actually about 90 miles of Columbia River coastline are involved in it if you count both sides of the river. And they set up the world's first industrial scale nuclear reactor there. And so you have to understand that what they were doing at Hanford was they were creating elements that did not exist on Earth before. And the phenomenon that you're talking about, and we'll get back into why Hanford's important and why perhaps they chose that site. And it's hard to say if it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing. Like I said, Mount Adams, huge UFO hotspot. The first main UFO sighting in the U.S. was the Kenneth Arnold sighting, June of 1947. And he was flying a private plane over the Cascade Mountains, basically past Mount Rainier, which is a little bit north of us, and he saw 9 UFOs, basically flying saucers, coming at a high rate of speed. They went from north to south, and they basically flew to Mount Adams. And so this was the beginning of the flying saucer craze in the United States, but it happened right here in our backyard. And at the foot of Mount Adams is a place called ECETI Ranch. And ECETI stands for Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And for several decades now, Jim Gilliland has been up there inviting people to his property. And people come from all over the world, and they watch lights and UFOs fly around Mount Adams all night long. People come skeptics, and they leave believers. And what's interesting is Mount Adams basically is high enough that you can look down. If you're on the summit, you can look down and see the Hanford nuclear reservation from there. And, there's a lot of theories that there are some extraterrestrial or non-human intelligences that were very concerned once humans began to unlock the secrets of the atom, that's sort of where they set up shop to keep an eye on things that were going on down there. And in fact, there are many stories of UFOs around this Hanford nuclear site, which turned out to be, our most important nuclear site in the country eventually. So, they forged the plutonium that was involved in the Trinity test, the very first nuclear explosion created by man in the history of ever. And then the fuel for the Nagasaki bomb came from Hanford. And then during the Cold War, they eventually had 9 nuclear reactors going on there, and they created enough plutonium to fuel 60,000 nuclear weapons. So it was the most important strategic site, nuclear site in the U.S. There was none that were even close to how important Hanford was. And there's a really interesting story about things that may have escaped from there. And we'll get into that in a minute, but it might help to back up and talk about the phenomenon. So we have had over 90 reports of a creature we call the Klickitat ape cat. So Klickitat is the county that we're in, and also the original First Peoples were named the Klickitats who lived in this area. And we have received reports of this enormous, very muscular, black cat-like creature um, that, in some reports, has a face that looks like a monkey. And to me, this is just one of the most fascinating things that's going on out here. Like I said, we've had well over 80 reports of this creature. And everyone talks about seeing a very large, very muscular uh, black cat with a long black tail. Now, of course, we have cougars out here. But when we talk to the wildlife professionals, they all say there's no such thing as a black cougar. So cougars are normally like a tawny, tannish color. When they express their melanin, they go to more of a reddish color. But black is never on the menu for cougars. And there's only one black furred large cat in North America, and that's the jaguar. But its range stops 1,000 miles south of Klickitat County. So why are we having all of these reports of large black cats? Well, of all those reports that we've had, um, about half of them say that the creature is enormous in size. So in some of these reports, it is said to be 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder. That's gigantic. So a cougar is typically no more than 24 inches tall at the shoulder. Tiger, maybe 3 feet. And tigers are the largest cats living today. But these creatures, when people describe, so in fact, one of my employees saw this. She was driving down Klickitat Canyon, which is Klickitat River is a river that flows off the glaciers of Mount Adams into the Columbia River. It's a beautiful, stunning rock canyon. And there's a few communities up there. And she was driving down Klickitat Canyon at dawn, and she saw this enormous cat-like creature, black in color, walking near the side of the road. She even stopped her car to look at it. And when she described it to her family, of course, they just laughed nervously, and they told her that she had probably seen a cow. So, first of all,
yeah, because like, so many cows look like cats.
Yeah, that's like seeing a red Lamborghini drive down the street. Family, you saw a red Lamborghini. They say, "Well, Lamborghinis are pretty rare. You probably saw a red minivan." It's like, nope. I'm pretty sure I know the difference, right? But when they described it, I mean, you can imagine that her description, the only animal that they could compare it to that was that size was a cow. So we're talking about just an animal of enormous size. And there's only one creature in the fossil record that matches it. And it was a creature that was alive during the Ice Age called the Panthera atrax. The Panthera atrax is also known as the American lion. And it was this gigantic cat-like creature, estimated between 1,000 and 1,300 pounds. Its skeletal remains are well documented. There were 80 of them found in the La Brea tar pits down in California, but it absolutely lived in Washington State back, 10,000 years ago. A creature that I could find that matches it. So, like I said, about half the people say that they see this enormous. It's enormous, like really, really big, and that manifests itself in the reports. Like, well, it leapt across the road in front of my car, and when its body was stretched out, its back paws to its front paws stretched from the white line past the yellow lines into the white line again. So just a huge, huge creature. And then there are a handful of reports, and this is the one that really kind of engaged me. To look like a monkey, and with intelligent ape-like eyes. So this is one of the mysteries of it for me personally. As I try to understand what's going on. Is this like I'll come to the conclusion. The witness will tell me that yes, we saw this one woman who was she was the crew chief for a wildland firefighting team, and they were operating between Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams, and the whole crew saw this giant black cat with the monkey legs. And they were, and having been a wildland forest fighter myself, forest firefighter myself, to me, that was a highly credible witness. And so, we've got these reports. It may be that we're dealing with multiple creatures, maybe shape-shifting creature, maybe, reporting anomalies or something like that. But very, very unusual and very, very strange for the area. Some folks say that it seems to be able to phase in and out of your ability to see it. Other people say that they have a sense that they're in the presence of some kind of special animal, something that's not normal or not from this world. And so we also know that there have been reports that go all the way back to 1968. And so this creature's been here for decades. And cats typically don't live more than 15 years. We believe it's a reproducing population that we're dealing with. In fact, one gentleman said that he saw it in his driveway, and it had a young kit with it, so a young cub. And so it seems to be reproducing. So a bunch of theories about where this thing might come from. In Klickitat County, we have a number of petroglyphs and the desert walls. And there are images of cat-like creatures that seem to be with wavy water lines underneath them. Now, that's very interesting because there is a North American tradition of a race of supernatural underwater panthers. And they are said to be protector creatures. They're called the Meshepeshu. And one description of the Meshepeshu is that they look like a black panther with the face of a man. So that's a very interesting connection and a possibility for us. When the Native Americans talk about creatures that come from the underwater realm or the sky realm or from the earth realm, they're talking about beings that have 1 foot in the physical world, everyday world that we know, and 1 foot in the spiritual world. And it's interesting that the petroglyphs we see out here have this cat-like face with wavy water lines underneath the head. And so there's one connection there. Those folks at the City Ranch claim to be in contact with a number of extraterrestrial races. And one of those races is a race of feline humanoids. And in fact, their logo, if you go to ecity.org, you'll see a lion's face on their logo, and that's representing one of the extraterrestrial races that they say that they're in contact with. And so those are some interesting clues. But if you don't want to go down a supernatural route, surprisingly, the most reasonable and mundane explanation is that it escaped from the Hanford nuclear reservation out a little bit upriver from us. So I've been firing. It feels like I've been firing stuff at you, and I want to give you a chance to jump in.
Oh, no, I've been fascinated by this. And as we were talking about it, and you're saying, you have this cryptid, and I had another guest, George Mitrovich, and he was pointing out when the frequencies lined up perfectly, like it could be a mountain where you could have an alien and have a Bigfoot and have a paranormal sighting, all because the energies are aligned in that moment on a sine wave. And I couldn't help but, as we were talking about the gorge, with all the energies flowing through there, thinking, if you have mountains on the left, mountains on the right, it's the sine wave just bouncing back and forth. And that's why they're so frequent more than others, because the sine wave is, in theory, trapped and just bouncing back and forth.
It's, like you come down here and you just can't help but have the sense, like if you can just calm your mind for a minute, maybe get out of your car and stand in, one of the natural areas, like there's a definite sense that there's something going on here, something unusual. It's a very mysterious and almost magical kind of a place.
And I'm kind of curious because you mentioned like people have seen portals. How do they know they've seen a portal? Like, did they say something was there and then just vanished? Or, how did they describe it as a portal?
Well, so one gentleman came in and to the store, and he said, Now I'm going to talk about this kind of stuff, but I've got a story to tell you about a portal. And I kind of jumped the gun on this one. I said, "Oh, you mean the portal that's on Mount Adams?" And there's a number of stories that there is a physical hangar door that opens on the side of Mount Adams, and UFOs fly in and out of it. In fact, some folks who were up at East Eddy Ranch caught some photographs that they claim is showing this um, basically hangar door that opens on the side of the mountain. And he said, "No, no, no, no. I'm talking about this was above and to the side of the mountain, and it looked like a hole in the sky." Basically, what he described was he was looking at the mountain, and off to the left of it, he could see what appeared to be a different kind of sky behind it. It was like this sort of amorphous circular shape and in the sky, and it looked like the sky behind it was different. And first he thought there was something wrong with his eyes, so he rubbed his eyes, and then he drove his car to another location to make sure that it wasn't something wrong with where he was or something like that. And sure enough, it was an older guy, probably in his 70s. He said, "Yep, it was the darndest thing." And he saw this, basically the background doesn't look like the area around it, and it's usually a roundish kind of shape. And there's another report that we had very similar. This one is at ground level, just east of the town of Lyle. So this is maybe 10, 12 minutes from my store. And you drive down Highway 14, and right there before there's a tunnel that goes through the rock there. And just before the tunnel, they saw a similar type of thing where there's sort of a strange circle-like shape, and what they could see inside of that circle didn't look like what they were seeing around the circle. So several reports like that, where people have these kinds of strange experiences. A number of reports sort of related to that, which is where people have temporal time and space displacement, where they believe like time has flowed differently for them, or they've been walking and suddenly they find themselves in a different place than they don't remember the space between where they started and where they ended traveling that distance. There's an area, this is maybe 15 miles from my store, called Broke Leg Barrows. On a lot of maps, it's labeled as the Big Lava Bed. It's this basically a mountain valley that was filled up with lava. And it's an area the size of the island of Manhattan. So just for context, 1.7 million people live on the island of Manhattan. So it's a pretty big area, right? And compasses don't work there. Cell phones don't work there. I had my drone out there and it couldn't acquire a GPS signal. It is supremely silent because all of these insane jagged rocks are forming micro canyons and strange ridge lines and caves. It's covered with moss. It's about 8,000 years old. And people have straight up gone absolutely missing, just vanished off the face of the earth. Not a single clue as to where they went. No footprints. They had bring in choppers and dogs and everything. The local hunters won't go in there, and or of Sasquatch in that area. And given like this one individual, his name was Chris Zitowitz, and he went missing in 2014. He was just 20 yards away from his hiking partner and then gone, nothing. And they had hundreds of search and rescue guys out there, dog teams, military helicopters, even military searchers came out. Not a single clue, nothing. And so when we talk about portals, those are the kind of reports that we get. It's very, very strange stuff. And but we were talking about this Hanford site, and so Hanford shut down as a nuclear weapons production facility in the 1980s, but still houses like the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And there's a facility out there. It was recently built called the LIGO. It stands for Laser Interferometer Gravitational Observatory. And its purpose, basically, it is these two tubes that are 2 miles long, and they sit perpendicular to each other. So it's like a big L shape in the desert. And these two tubes extend for 2 miles long, and they're extremely precise measuring devices. And their goal, their purpose, you go to the LIGO.org website and you'll see that what they are trying to do is identify anomalies in the space time continuum. And a week after they turned this thing on, they identified anomalies in the space time continuum. So the amount of just absolutely bonkers, weird stuff that's going on out here is really off the charts. And, you go back to World War II. So, and the Manhattan Project. So everyone knows that we're racing the Nazis for the bomb. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the Nazis were really into creating super soldiers and super animals. In fact, they even brought back an extinct Ice Age creature called the aurochs. And it's like this giant hyper-aggressive bull-like creature. And they populated a forest in Poland with it. They were doing things like retro breeding and everything else. Well, the thing about radiation back in the 40s is they knew that it induced mutations, but they really didn't understand radiation like we do today. And so the Allies were terrified, not only that they would uncover the bomb, but they would figure out ways to genetically manipulate creatures with radiation to create super animals. And so when they spun up Hanford, it was a completely top secret program. And they had an animal testing laboratory there from day one. They tapped a university professor from the University of Washington, a guy by the name of Dr. Lorne Donaldson. And his only academic achievement before receiving this assignment was he had created a super animal, a real live, viable super animal. It's called the Donaldson super trout. And it is basically a trout-like fish that is 8 times larger and stronger than a normal fish. And it can swim in salt water and fresh water. It reaches sexual reproductive maturity in half the time. And it's a super survivable fish. So he's the guy that they put in charge of the animal testing laboratory at Hanford when it spins up during World War II. Well, they go through a number of different iterations. We win the war. They announce Hanford as a thing. Then they immediately clamp it back down because the Cold War starts, because the Nazis are scooping up all these the Russians are scooping up all these Nazi scientists. So we start bringing some Nazi scientists into our fold through Operation Paperclip. And eventually, Donaldson passes the baton of this animal testing laboratory over to a guy named Bill Baer. And Donaldson goes to the South Pacific, and he's involved in like all the Bikini Atoll tests and the disastrous Castle Bravo tests and all the things that brought rise to the Godzilla mythology. And he stays in contact with this Bill Baer guy who's now running the animal testing laboratory at Hanford. And this facility grows to be so that it could house 1,000 large animals at a time. It is an absolutely massive endeavor. And they, at Hanford, they're doing tests on the local population without their consent or knowledge. And they're sending teams out to go check on their medical records and to check on the livestock in the area that they irradiate by taking the filters off the stack. There's a very infamous event called the Green Run where they exposed the population in 200 square miles to iodine, I think 131, and xenon as well. But we have cattle mutilation stories that come into the story. And that is directly part of the actual Hanford program, where Bill Baer, in some of these interviews that he does after the facility closed down, talks about, we would send guys out to go extract samples from livestock in the area. Well, they've got this giant animal testing lab, and they begin testing apex predators, irradiating apex predators. And the one that we have actual historical documentation of, and Bill Baer talks about it in 3 different interviews, these sort of history of Hanford interviews that he does, oral histories. And he even holds up a picture of a device that they use to irradiate alligators with X radiation. And it's got alligators in it. And so they're irradiating this pack of alligators that they have. The stories vary, but it's either between 20 and 40 alligators. Well, one night, 6 of these experimental irradiated apex predators outsmart the scientists, and they escape into the Columbia River. And so there are 6 alligators that are these test subjects that are now swimming around in, basically a public waterway. And this is the second time that alligators escaped. One of them was caught by a fisherman, stuffed and put into a sporting goods store. It was actually caught in the Columbia River. And the Hanford team, which of course Hanford's run by the Department of Energy, they have to go in and confiscate it because this thing is radioactively hot. And so this time, when these 6 alligators escaped, they put out a press release, and so it's part of the public record that there are alligators in the Columbia. And so they have this army hunting team that secretly goes out and hunts these creatures for 6 months, from July to January, and they only ever catch 4 of the 6 gators. And we've had some reports of that might be alligators in the store. Folks have said that something large grabbed their kayak from underneath and tried to pull it under, but no actual sightings in our store. But Bill Bear, in these oral histories, says, yeah, even into the 80s, he was getting reports from Fish and Wildlife guys asking if he knew anything about alligators in the Columbia River. And he would just say no and then hang up on them. And then he laughs about it in the interviews. So it is a 100% historically confirmed fact that they are experimenting on apex predators at Hanford. They can't contain those animals, and once they escape, they can't recapture them. And so the public stated purpose of this animal testing laboratory was to see what happened, like if livestock get exposed to radiation, like if a cow gets exposed, can you still drink its milk, like things like that are important for a war effort, or like a Cold War effort. But they really don't ever give an explanation as to why they are experimenting in apex predators. I mean, like, we don't eat alligator meat, we don't drink alligator milk, anything like that. And the reason may have to actually do with dolphins. So since 1958, the US government has used dolphins to guard some of our most sensitive nuclear sites. In fact, in the 90s, a quarter of the US nuclear stockpile was guarded by dolphins. And the reason why is many of our nuclear sites are on waterways. And it is really one of the biggest threats would be Soviet scuba divers, especially with night vision gear, coming in and surveilling or sabotaging your facility. And if you can't really use sonar to effectively detect these divers, because sonar signature of a scuba diver looks very similar to that of a sea lion or tuna fish or some other aquatic animal, but you can train a dolphin to tell the difference. And what they would do is they would rig the dolphins with a special apparatus on their snout that had like a harpoon-like barb on it. And they would train the dolphin to swim and ram into the body of the diver. And that barb would stick into their flesh, and then a balloon would inflate, and it would bring the diver to the surface. And then they'd scoop them up and be able to gather intelligence. A dead diver at the bottom of the ocean doesn't tell you anything. You really want to know, what his gear was like and hopefully what he was doing. And so it's 100% confirmed that the US government used animals to protect our most sensitive nuclear sites. And there was no more sensitive nuclear site than Hanford. The problem is Hanford has got 90 miles of river coastline that need to be guarded, but it's a freshwater coastline, and you can't bring dolphins in there because dolphins only operate in saltwater. So if you're a zealous cold warrior and you're doing your due diligence, you're going to start looking for animals that can be effective sentry creatures in a freshwater environment. So you'd probably check out alligators, for sure. But you'd also ask yourself this question: what is the world's most effective riverine hunter? Well, it turns out to be the black jaguar. Black jaguars can hold their breath for 15 minutes. They can eat underwater. They can swim for a kilometer in the open ocean. They can kill alligators, interestingly enough, with a single bite to the back of the head. Pound for pound, they're the strongest of the big cats. They have night vision that's 6 times better than a human being. And most importantly, they always instinctively drag their prey to shore. And so if you were going to go down a checklist and say, okay, what kind of animal do we want to train to be a sentry for this facility? A jaguar would definitely be at the top of your list. And so what we think happened was, just like the alligator program, they were experimenting on irradiating and perhaps mutating black cats, black jaguars, Just like the gators, those creatures outsmarted the scientists and escaped. And once they escaped, they were unable to recapture them. And surprisingly, that is the most reasonable and logical explanation as to why we're seeing these giant black cats roaming around Klickitat County. If you were to go north, east, or south from Hanford, you'd go deeper into desert. If you were to head west into Klickitat County, you'd start to get into that Pacific Northwest rainforest area where there is abundant food and plenty of habitat, which would be conducive to these creatures' existence. Interestingly, in the 40 years or so, maybe even more, 50 years of reports, there have been no hostile encounters. So no one has ever reported this thing attacking them or ever being aggressive. We do have many reports of them being completely fearless of humans, however. And if you think about the notion of training an animal to be a sentry creature, you would want it to be comfortable around humans, not attack humans on sight, but only attack humans or whoever you're going after under certain conditions with certain commands. So, like I said, surprisingly, the notion that the government, these are escaped experimental creatures, is the most reasonable and logical one we could come up with.
That's really fascinating. And I know we had talked about time when we were backstage and we're actually approaching the hour. Do you have time to cover one more topic, or do you need
Sure.
to go?
What do you want to talk about?
So I was curious because you mentioned Sasquatch, you mentioned the ape cat. Are there other cryptids in the area, and could it be, conducive to more escaped possible experiments from the facility, or are they completely different and their descriptions?
We do have a number of cryptids, and this is one of those questions that really has got me curious. It's almost like we're at some kind of strange crossroads. So this one was a personal story. I've got a 10-year-old daughter, and when we get a recent report, she'll go out and investigate with me. And so it's kind of fun. And I've got this sort of enhanced 4-wheel drive FJ Cruiser, and it's got spotlights and cameras and drones and all kinds of gear on it. And we call it the cryptid. And that's what we go out and do these experiments or go do our research with. And we were driving around in the cryptid. The whole family was in the rig, and we were going up some dirt roads, and we pulled off to the side to let another vehicle pass. And my daughter looked out the window. She said, "Oh, there's a big snake out the window. It's about 4 feet long." "Oh, that's interesting." And the other car passed. And we started driving away. She said, "Yeah." I said, "Tell us about the snake you saw." She says, "Well, it was sort of like light brownish in color, and it had these frills on the side of its head, and the frills were sort of reddish, and then they faded to a yellow color." And she was just describing this animal that she had seen. And I was listening with intense curiosity because there are no frilled snakes in Washington State, in North America, in the Western Hemisphere, or on Earth. And so my daughter, looking out the window like a curious 9-year-old at the time, saw a creature that shouldn't exist anywhere in the world. And she's my kid. I know her well enough to know when she's making something up. And for her, she wasn't thinking about this being her reporting something paranormal. She was just reporting one of the many creatures we see when we drive around out here. So fascinating. And that's just one story. We've had stories of large dog-like creatures that whistle and are hairless and are definitely not dogs, that seem to be afraid of the sunlight. We've had stories of enormous 20-foot tall, hairy type creatures that are not Sasquatches as well. We've had reports of 2.5 to 3 foot tall humanoids. Some of them have praying mantis-like heads and are associated with places where owls are seen standing in the road. And a whole variety of unusual cryptids, strange creatures. Some of them are related to some of the Native American traditions from the area and the stories that they tell of the creatures they encountered, especially creatures from the spirit realm. But yeah, there's just a whole host of strange things. And, I am scratching my head as we try to piece together what this could possibly mean. There's a couple of theories. They were experimental creatures that escaped, or the Department of Energy opened some type of portal and these things are able to move through there, or there's natural portals occurring because of the types of magnetic properties of the rocks in the area. And it's and we've got reports of government secret bases, and we've got strange advanced military aircraft flying through the area all the time, and they may be here observing all that. It's really hard to say. The Department of Energy's top secret policies are even more strict than the Department of Defense, is highly compartmentalized, and so some of these things we may never know with any kind of real facts. But the point is that this is a place where, I mean, it is filled with magic and wonder, and that is, to me, it's so exciting and satisfying and amazing and wonderful to be in a place where all the questions aren't answered, and to sort of have set up our store in such a way that we are a focal point for all that. And this is the place where people come and report that. It is, like I said, it's been a truly wondrous and amazing experience.
And to think this was all, I think you put it in the terms of inherited to you. And so it's like, you can't help but wonder if somebody was looking into the future and going, he's going to do right by this. We should give this to him. And because if we give it to these people, they're going to totally cover this up, destroy this, possibly.
Yeah. It's fun to wonder. And it's, and I honestly, I encourage, especially folks who are interested in the paranormal, to come out to the gorge and visit. My store is in Bingen, Washington. We're right across the river from Hood River, which is a fairly popular destination, vacation destination for folks. But yeah, come out and explore. In the store, we've got big maps on the wall. I'm a sort of a Dungeons and Dragons nerd from back in the day. You can kind of see the map behind me for those of your listeners who've got video. And so I drew that map of the gorge, and it shows where a lot of this locations of many of the sightings are. We've got a couple of self-guided tours. I call them arcane adventure maps. So I've illustrated and written guides to some of the paranormal hotspots. One's called Beacon Rock, which is this giant 840-foot tall rock monolith where there have been numerous apparitions and Bigfoot sightings and orb sightings. And then there's also Horse Thief Butte, which is also a very mysterious place where we've had ape cat sightings and some of those small humanoid sightings, and there are petroglyphs on the wall. Excuse me. And so we're trying in all the ways that we can to give people the tools to go out and investigate and enjoy these phenomena for themselves. And we love sort of being at the center of it. We love people coming back and telling us what they experienced while they're out in the wilds.
And real quick, because you brought up the small humanoids again, what's your take on the small humanoids? Do you think they're visitors to the world, or from inner Earth, or just natural habitat to the gorge area?
That's a strange one. So the encounter, the report we received about this small humanoid, it was in one of the desert areas, 2:00 in the morning. And the person was driving, and there's a wide spot in the road. They saw a skinny creature no taller than the hood of their car standing on the side of the road. Definitely, bipedal, and a head shaped like a praying mantis. As they drove past it, their cell phone started going crazy, and all the lights on their console died, the center console of their car. And then they got about 200 yards down the road, and they started feeling nauseous and dizzy. This is a person that knows me, and they thought, oh, maybe I should go back because James is really going to want to hear about this. And I thought, hell no, I'm not going back to see what that thing was. And then they made their way home, and the next day they told me about it. I went out there, and the other thing that they had said in that same spot, it was on their way home, and they've driven past it many, many times, they frequently see owls standing by the side of the road. Very curious behavior for owls. I went out there and did an investigation. Um, there were no distinct footprints that I could really make out. No anomalous EMF readings. Did see owl pellets there, but the area is also fairly close to some of those high power transmission lines. And in terms of what that is, that's a hard one to say. When you look at the alien abduction phenomenon, or even the Fey abduction phenomenon in Europe, with all the stories of fairies and people being abducted to fairyland and having reproductive encounters with those type of beings, or even some of the shamanic stories, this notion of an owl as an emissary between worlds is very, very common. And we see that in some of the Native American traditions of the Klickitat people and the other people who lived in the gorge. There are stories that say that the petroglyphs in the area were not actually created by humans, but were created by these small humanoid creatures that had woven rabbit fur clothing. And so we know that there's definitely stories of humanoids, small humanoids from the first people. We know that there are stories that people are experiencing today. Some are this weird praying mantis shaped head thing associated with owls. Others are more perfectly formed humans that don't seem to be in any way misshapen, just small. My sense is that they're, I guess commonly folks would say transdimensional, but the way that I like to think about it is, so if you imagine right now, if you had your radio turned on, you could be listening to classical music, right? So imagine that classical music is like our brains, which are basically just receiving apparatus. Our senses are receiving apparatus, and they're tuned to channel normal, and we'll call it just like the classical music. But with a slight tweaking of the dial, basically the electromagnetic receiver, you can suddenly be listening to rock and roll, or you can suddenly be listening to talk radio. Those signals are present in the environment already. They already exist. The rock and roll station is broadcasting, the talk radio station is broadcasting, and the classical musical station is broadcasting. But your brain is just tuned to classical music, and that's where it sits most of the time. What I think happens when people get out to the gorge is their electromagnetic tuner is adjusted slightly, and they're suddenly able to perceive things that are always there, just not your receiving apparatus. Your brain is not tuned to it. Does that make sense? You understand what I'm saying?
It does, and it might explain too why, with the energies of the area, why it's more they're living there is because they're able to sustain just as well as we are. And so it's just like the perfect kind of,
Mm-hmm.
you'd almost say, biodome
Yeah.
ecosystem for them.
And by the same token, they have their receiving apparatus, and they may be tuning to our channel, and thereby entering, and they're perceiving us. So I really think that because we have a phenomenon that's captured on film that leave footprints that are co-witnessed by multiple folks, and we did get a chance to talk about some of those stories, but we've had stories where 6 river rafting guides watch a UFO, giant egg-shaped UFO floating above the river for 45 minutes. So like when you have a co-witness situation, or you have a physical evidence situation, or you have a photographed situation, you can't be talking about something that's purely confined to a hallucination within one person's brain. These are phenomena which are sort of mixing with our physical reality. And so you have to account for that. You can't just say it's a hallucination, or someone's off their rocker, or they're doing drugs, or whatever it is. Interestingly, when you look at like ayahuasca trips, or people who are on different types of quote unquote hallucinogens, they are seemingly perceiving a persistent, consistent reality that's different from our own. But those substances are altering their tuning mechanism, their tuning apparatus, just like the magnetism might be doing. And even more interesting, when you look at those cases, you don't see, like if you're hallucinating, you would imagine that that your brain activity should be accelerating. You should have more brain activity because you're producing these images and these sights and these sounds and everything else. But what the actual science shows is that brain activity actually slows down when you're having those hallucinatory, quote unquote, hallucinatory experiences. What that seems to indicate to me is that you're not producing, your brain is not manufacturing these experiences. Your brain is calming down and perceiving what is actually there. So it's a fascinating thing, and I'm not a scientist myself, and I can only have theories and do my reading and look at what the field data here in the gorge is showing us. But I really do believe that you can call it another dimension, but I call it another channel of information that we're tuning to that we just normally aren't tuned to.
Right, and I think the benefit to that is, like you saying, you're not a scientist, because unfortunately, scientists nowadays go into locations to verify their theories, or to say, oh, if it's not our theory, we can't explain it, and just leave it at that. Where you're going in and saying, look, this is what the evidence shows. This is what I can gather from the evidence. And so it's like, you have no agenda, where some scientists do have an agenda. So I'm not saying all scientists are bad, don't get me wrong, but a lot of them go in and are like, hey, I wrote my paper on this. I don't want to have to rewrite my paper. So yes, we're going to say it's this.
There's a lot at stake, even if it's not paranormal. If you are going to go against the current, sort of paradigms of your field, like, you're in for a rough road. Like, you can have your funding revoked, you can have your professional or your academic reputation ruined. Like, there's a lot of things that can go south for you if you don't toe the dogma of what the groupthink is for your particular scientific discipline. And so, when you're like, fortunately, our stores are very successful. We do well, and for me, this is one of the extra things that I get to do, because we're making enough money to support it. And so I don't have to worry about an academic reputation or whether my funding is going to be cut. We're sort of a self-funded operation, and we're able to explore what the field data is showing us, and certainly welcome open-minded scientists to come and share their thoughts on it. But and some of the greatest insights that we have are coming from people who are doing good science and are sort of willing to step beyond the boundaries. But it's just like I said, fascinating and wondrous, really satisfying endeavor.
Right, and I think it's great how the community is kind of supporting it, in the way of they're coming and saying, hey, I had this happen. Like you're saying, coming in the store, filing reports with you, or coming to you and saying, hey, did you hear, have you had anyone tell you about this? And so I think that's another reason why you're doing so well, is because the community is kind of backing you. So you're not having to sit there and go, oh, wait, I have a business to run. I better not rock the, water too much. So you're free to go where the evidence goes, because the people are behind you that, support you.
Yeah, it really is satisfying, and we're very thankful to have. At first, a lot of people had their arms folded and weren't so sure about what we're up to, but now a lot of people have fun with it, and the Klickitat ape cat is sort of becoming the local mascot. So that's kind of fun.
I'm starting to feel like there's a Jurassic Park feeling coming to the gorge. Come and see the cryptids. Come and see the cats.
Yeah. But of course, folks, if they want to have fun and play along with us, you can visit our website, margiesoutdoorstore.com. We've got some information up there. Typically try to post the interviews that I do, like this one. There are also on Margie's Outdoor Store on Facebook. We do a little bit on YouTube, trying to do more, a little bit on Instagram. But if you are curious about what we're doing, those are some of the best ways to hook into that. Those like the Arcane Adventure maps and the map behind me. We sell those in the store. Unfortunately, we haven't sort of figured out a way to get them to sell online yet, but that's something we're working on.
Well, that's really cool, and thank you for that, and for the listeners and everyone watching. He did say those links really quick, and they are in the description. So if you missed it, you can go in the description and find them. So I got you covered there.
Thank you.
And thank you, James, for coming on and sharing everything with us. And I had to say, my mind was blown. I kind of was expecting, some stuff out there, but man, we went way out there. And I love it. And I love hearing stories like that and, having those experiences, because I doubt a lot of people, when they're going, hey, let's go on a paranormal adventure, go, hey, let's go check out that Columbia River Gorge. Yeah. I don't think it's on a lot of radars yet, and I hope that this does put it on the radar of the paranormal investigators that are truly in the field for investigating, not going out there to try and steal stuff from the area and go, oh, look, I got a trophy from the area. It's like, no, we're about preservation, not about,
exploitation.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if anyone like that comes to the store, stop at my store in Bingen. If I'm not in the store, let the employees know that you're a paranormal investigator, and they usually have a way to find me. We've got a couple of different businesses and a couple of different buildings. And so I'm always happy to chat with folks who are interested in investigations.
Well, thank you, and may take you up on that if I'm in the, is it Washington or Oregon area? I get confused.
Basically, you'd fly into Portland, Oregon, and then drive for about an hour and cross the bridge, and you'll be in Washington State.
Okay.
Yeah,
not so bad.
Basically, Washington and Oregon, for those of us who live in the gorge, we consider it one community. So even though they're two states, we're bound together by the river and the gorge. And so it's, like we consider the gorge the community.
Well, I'm starting to feel like not like, Children of the Corn vibe of, community, but like more like, I would say the closest thing would be like Amish, to where everyone is gathered together and, and benefiting everything.
We used to live in Seattle before we moved down, and we went from, 7 to 10,000 people per square mile to 10 people per square mile. And so it's a small town vibe in a lot of ways. And it's really, really fun. Because, like I said, people will stop me in the grocery store and tell me their Sasquatch story, and I just love it. And so it's a small community, and we have a lot of common interests, and we look out for each other. And everyone's, kind of has that sense of pride of being from the gorge if you live out here.
Well, that's really cool, and I love that. And like I said, if I'm ever in the area, I'll definitely put that on my list of gotta go check out, and stop in and say hello if you're around.
I'd love to see you.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone in the chat room for your questions, comments, and I want to thank everyone for watching. And before I send us out, I just want to state, for everyone that's watching, I hope you have a wonderful evening, a wonderful day, or a wonderful afternoon wherever you are in the world. But for us, it's nighttime, so good night from us.
We'll see you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.